Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Saga, Paper Girls, Why the Last Man, Runaways, Ex Machina, Spectators over on Substack, and a whole lot more. It's Brian K. Vaughan. Thanks for coming on, Brian.
My pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
So it's Saga week, issue number 59, which I'm holding up. No one can see that, but issue 59 arrived in comic shops and digital marketplaces everywhere. It's your fourth issue back. Just to start with, how does it feel to be back in the saddle of Saga?
Such a relief. I'm just a psychological mess when I don't have Saga to sort of pour out my neuroses and feelings into. So it's life-giving to be able to collaborate with Fiona Staples again. Just getting her artwork periodically in my inbox has just added years to my life. So I'm very lucky.
I do think it's really interesting looking at the difference between Fiona when she first started on the run and then looking at her art now. And you've pointed this out before in an interview, but it's really amazing looking at the first page of number 1 and the first page of number 55 because it's a deliberate parallel, and you can just see how she's gotten so much better. It's insane.
Yeah, she has definitely evolved, and it's not like she was crummy when she started. She came out of the gate with that first page is like instantly iconic. You just a totally unique voice. But yeah, she could have just settled in and just stayed that Fiona forever. But, you can see the difference between issue 2 and issue 1 of Saga with her. And it's just been just a steady, straight line shooting up of her skills. It's kind of breathtaking and annoying because, as I also point out, you cannot see a similar growth out of me. I'm the same exact writer that I was beat for beat. So I'm glad that she's here. At least someone is pushing this thing forward.
Everyone's like, Saga keeps getting better, but Brian doesn't. It's Fiona. Fiona's really good. I do have to say, though, I agree with you that she was always good because I just had this comic book garage sale, and it's always interesting. I think it's interesting to see collections in general because it kind of, I think, tells a story about a person. But one of the things that I kept in my keep pile, not sell pile, was the Wildstorm miniseries North 40 because that was where I first came across Fiona's art, and I think she's amazing in that. I think she was even nominated for an Eisner for that.
Yeah, I had also discovered Fiona prior to that. I'd seen her work, and I think it wasn't just that Wildstorm story. There was also an Authority short story that she had done, which was incredible. So yeah, I'd seen her, but I hadn't really thought of her for Saga until later. But either way, it worked out beautifully.
So we're talking about beginnings, early days, and I did want to go back through your career a little bit. And I wanted to start with your breaking in story because I think it's actually really fascinating. I know it's going way back, but let's start with that. So you went to film school, but it seemed as if comics were always your goal. I do think it's funny that film school seemingly proved to be a shortcut to comics in one very specific and unexpected way, in that you ended up making a connection with a Marvel editor named James Felder who visited NYU looking for potential writers. I am interested in, was that fateful meeting with James Felder kind of the start of your path to writing comics in the sense that it kind of got your foot in the door?
100%. Yeah, I would not be here if it were not for James Felder and this thing he started called the Stanhattan Project, which is obviously named after Stan Lee. And he was an editor at Marvel, and I think it was sort of a dark time in the early 90s where, a lot of writers had been former editors, were former assistant editors, were former interns. I think he felt Marvel was getting sort of incestuous and that maybe they should try looking outside of themselves for new writers. And wisely, he's like, NYU is right down the street, and they're young, quote unquote, classically trained writers there. And most importantly, they will probably work very, very cheaply. So why don't we go over there and try and scoop up some new talent? So, I was a beneficiary of that. It was Joe Kelly was in the first year. And I remember, I think I was reading Wizard magazine about, there was this new thing called the Stanhattan Project, and they had already found a new writer from it. And I was cursing my poor luck until I got down to the part about it being at NYU. And I was like, that's where I'm at. And it was at a point where I was really frustrated with film school and just making a lot of terrible short films and being like, this is not maybe what I'm cut out for.
Yeah.
And I so loved comics. But, circa 1995 or whatever, there was no college that you could go to. There's no university offering, how to write comics classes. So yeah, this was just such an unbelievable blessing to be at the right place at the right time for that.
I do have to say, it is a pretty incredible moment that you got in there because, first off, I was trying to figure it out. It seemed like you couldn't have been more than 20 years old when you published your first work at Marvel, which is, I don't want to say, I don't know this to be true, but I feel like it's true. It feels unusual to be that young to do that. But then on top of that, your first work at Marvel was published in 1997, which was the year after Marvel filed for bankruptcy. And I had Brian Michael Bendis on, who had started at Marvel a couple years later. And I remember him telling me something like he felt like he could be writing some of the last Marvel comics ever because they were literally wheeling file cabinets out, like when he was walking into the office for the first time. What was it like getting in at that moment and at that age? Did it feel like maybe that situation opened a door for you that might not have been there otherwise?
Oh yeah, I was 19 when I got my first check
Woo!
with Spider-Man on it, and it was. I was there to see. I remember I got invited to a Marvel Christmas party, and it was like the last Marvel Christmas party. It was like at an open bar in this extraordinary New York location, and yeah, there was just a sense of, oh, this is all coming to a close. And I was so excited. I just felt like this is a great opportunity. I just knew that whenever there was sort of financial trauma happening, that there are chances for good creative things to happen. I guess I just had that sense with, what happened with cinema in the 1970s. And so I was excited. I did have a sense that, oh, this is a really bad time for this corporation, but this is a potentially really exciting time for comics, and I might be able to exploit all this financial sadness to my own ends.
I do think that's a good point, though. It is interesting how I feel like moments like that open up opportunity for risk taking that wouldn't otherwise be there. Because right after that, you had not you, but I mean like the Marvel you had Marvel Knights come out. And then Ultimate came out of there, and there was just a lot of great work that came out of that. And it is interesting, and it's not like that's like that's not something you can chase, nor do you want to, because I feel like that'd be kind of morbid. But it is interesting how sometimes opportunities like that kind of open the door for really good storytelling in unexpected ways.
Yeah, I think so. If nothing else but desperation of, the old stuff isn't working, and we're going to try something new, and maybe we have to reach out to new people, like I say, who are willing to work cheap, but the trade-off is they might not give you the old stuff that you were used to. So again, right place at the right time, but insanely, ridiculously lucky I've been.
I have to say, so I want to jump into Why the Last Man, and I got to tell you a story about that, about being right place, right time. So Why the Last Man is your Vertigo series with Pia Guerra, obviously, and I had stopped reading comics. I took the classic 3 to 4 year gap in late high school and early college. I had stopped reading comics, and when I was back home for the summer one year, my mom, who knew I loved comics, told me that the one thing that she was ever ashamed of me of was the fact that I gave up on something I love, and that she wanted me to try comics again because I always loved them. And so she took me to the comic shop. She said, I'll buy you like any trade paperback you want. So when I went in, I talked to the clerk at my shop, and he asked me what I loved. And the last comic I had read to completion was Preacher. Because I always like to say that the reason why I stopped reading in reality was that I realized when I finished Preacher that there's no way I would ever find a comic better than that. So I was like, I'm done. Mm-hmm. I'm done. But when I said that, he recommended the first trade of Why the Last Man, which just came out. And I loved it so much. I'm now here talking to you. And I'm going to tell you what I once wrote in a letter to Pia amidst a whole lot of thank yous and compliments for her incredible work, which is, you two owe me a lot of money because comics are expensive and I wouldn't still be reading them without you. What have you done, Brian?
I know. I'm sorry. I think about this because when people are hooked, it's no small investment to fall in love with an ongoing series. So thank you. But it sounds like you should be angry with your mother, who is in the history of comics maybe the first heroic mom at this stage. But usually, isn't it like, throw these goddamn comics out?
Yeah.
And they're always tossing them in the trash. But your mom brought you back to comics? That has to be a first. I've not heard of that before.
She even volunteered to keep my long boxes in the closet after I moved out. And she's like, just in case you want them later. And I'm like, oh my God, looking back on it, I mean, like, That comic book garage sale obviously wouldn't have happened, but yeah, you're right. Heroic mom. My mom is the best, and she led me here, so I really appreciate it. But I do, with Y. I know you told the cartoonist kayfabe crew that you pitched Y as a 5-year gig because at the time you basically really wanted work and needed work. I imagine after Y became a hit, that wasn't quite as difficult. How did that series becoming a hit start changing things for you in your career?
It was instantaneous. I mean, to have just gone from, because you talk about a Stan Hatton project was getting my foot in the door, which is 100% true. But then you realize that that is such a small step towards having a comic book career that you get your foot in the door and they immediately kick your foot back out and
Right.
you have to try and weasel your way back in. So yeah, I just had such a scattershot career of sort of bouncing between Marvel and DC, and Vertigo had always been the dream, particularly doing my own thing, and to be handed the keys to Swamp Thing, which is just a series that I revered, and to really tanked that for Vertigo, felt like I am done here. So yeah, I'm just so enormously grateful to Karen Berger for giving me another shot and being like, okay, Swamp Thing didn't work out, but do you have maybe something of your own? And yeah, and I think there was a lot of sense that maybe before it came out, I think internally everyone was like, well, this one didn't quite work, and we'll put out a couple of issues and it'll be quietly canceled. I don't think anyone, myself included, expected it to come out and do well. But yeah, I remember being in, like, just picking up my comics at Midtown Comics and walking over to a magazine store on Times Square and reading a Entertainment Weekly review of Y the Last Man that they gave an A to. And I was like, that I'm in Entertainment Weekly. That was such a leap forward. At the time, it's just the only place to go to read about pop culture. So to appeared in it at all, I would have been happy to have gotten an F. It's like, at least there's my name in print. But it connected right away, and yeah, instantly everything changed. And yeah, I just did have a sense like, oh, I can maybe, if I don't screw this up too badly, I can make comic books for the rest of my life now. And it's 20 years later, at least I am. We'll see if I can make it the rest of my days, but for now, yeah, it's going okay.
I imagine that also kind of changed how you were viewed to a certain degree. Because, I mean, I'm not saying that you had like a negative view or something like that, but I imagine up until that point, you were almost like this. You were a superhero guy. You were a guy who would write stuff for Marvel and DC. Like, you wrote on Batman and your first issue. Notably, I thought this was interesting. There's a Cable number 43 apparently was, according to a Key Collector app, is your first comic you ever published. And I think it's funny that, like, you're so notable that your first comic you ever published is considered a key comic, like a comic that everyone needs to pursue. But up until that point, you were perceived as a superhero writer. And then I imagine once Y the Last Man came out and was a hit, maybe that kind of changes the vision of what you're capable of. So when you pitch Ex Machina, or you pitch something that's maybe a little bit different, like Runaways, maybe those are a little bit easier sells because you've already done it.
Yeah, I'll have to correct you and say I don't think I was viewed as a superhero person. I was not viewed at all.
Oh.
I was like, and rightly so. I think in wrestling terms, they're like, this guy's a jobber. You're just supposed to go out and you're there to count the lights and lose to someone else. I was just a guy who was fast and somewhat dependable. And if there was a hole in your schedule and you needed someone, but I don't think I had a following. I was
Sure.
No one's first choice for anything. So no, I don't think I had, I have to correct what everyone thinks about me. It was nice. I think for most people, they're like, who the hell is this guy that just showed up? It was one of those, overnight success. And I'd been toiling away for years and years at that point. So no, I think there was just a lot of freedom of, who the hell is this guy? And he did this weird thing about a monkey and a guy, and it seems to be working. So, do you have any other monkey stories?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's just, how do you pitch something that it's not Y the Last Man, which I was so desperate right away to do something that was the opposite of that. So, yeah.
Even from the start, was that the type of story you were looking to tell in comics?
I guess I've never been looking to tell one type of story. And, I was at my happiest there was a time where I was writing like 5 monthly books, and it was great. I'm too old and weak to be able to do that anymore. But I really liked being able to switch. Like I know Garth Ennis can write 4 issues of The Boys in a month or something, and I never could do that. I could only write Y, and then I would need to switch over to Runaways, and then switch over to Ex Machina, because they're just different parts of myself that I like exploring at different times. So no, I like
Variety.
yeah, just me a variety, of course, and just doing something that is original. And I so loved characters like Spider-Man growing up, and it was just so clear as I was working on them that this is not my strength. That there's something that I always bump up against when it comes to writing other people's characters. I just sort of can't find their voices. So I just wanted to collaborate with incredible artists and make as many new things as we could.
Yeah. I do want to say that the first issue I picked up in single issues after reading it in trades was Why the Last Man number 42, or 1000 Typewriters as it's called. It's the ampersand-centric issue for those who don't know. And it bizarrely, for some reason, every Vertigo title from that era I picked up. I started buying in single issues with number 42, completely by accident, unplanned. I have no idea why. All of my collections start with number 42. But anyways, as a writer, do you like variety in your own stories too? Because I think Y is an interesting example. You have that ampersand-centric story. You have that two-parter that follows like the troupe of actors and everything. And it seems like you do enjoy kind of exploring self-contained issues or short stories like that every once in a while to maybe expand on the world or expand on the characters that don't normally get as much spotlight.
Yeah, it was Neil Gaiman talked a lot about this was the joy of Sandman, that creating a series that could become what you wanted it or what you needed it to be from month to month. And that is it is easy to fall into a rut with these things. And it's it's something Fiona and I have continued with Saga, where it's like, oh, we're in the mood for this to feel like a Western, this arc, or whatever, soapy melodrama, or just switching between. I do what I love most, I think, is what Hollywood hates the most. I found is an inconsistent tone that Hollywood loves. You can do whatever. It can be a broad comedy. It can be a searing drama. It just has to be that consistently.
Right.
And I hate that. That is not my life. My life has always been, a broad physical comedy one moment, and then a nightmarish horror the next. I think most of our lives are like that. So I do try and find stories that will, have broad enough shoulders, I think, to carry lots of different kinds of tales on them.
I do think that's a very comics specific, not necessarily a comic specific idea, but something that's maybe allowed by comics in a way that isn't normally. Like, I interviewed Stuart Immonen a while back, and one of the things he told me was he kind of always wished that he had like a single style, because artists who have a single style, they're known for something. They get developed in a certain way. My argument is that Stuart Immonen is one of the best and most successful artists ever, and
Agreed.
He should just do whatever he thinks is right. But then also you look at like somebody like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, and those two together, it's like Ed is always writing to make sure that Sean doesn't get bored. That's one of the things that they've told me in the past, basically, is like they want to try to find something different, so like they keep each other excited about making comics. And I do think that's an interesting, very comic specific thing where it's almost like, I mean, I guess this is the creator owned ideal. You become known for the quality of the work as much as the type of work or genre of work, if you will.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I did want to bring up your artistic collaborators because I'm briefly going to bring up Runaways, your Marvel series you did with Adrian Alfona. And I'm not going to dig too much in the book, but I came across an interview you did with THR where you said you saw Adrian's versions of the Runaway Kids and his artwork for the book, and you knew you needed to take the series in another direction. And I thought that was interesting because it reminded me of how you knew when you saw Fiona's drawing of Goose that he needed to be in Saga more. Like this guy is too cute, and like he just needed to be in there more. Do you find that obviously you're scripting for the artistic collaborators in the way that you script, but do you find that sometimes that your artistic collaborators often shape your projects together in a similarly unplanned way? Like you see the art and it maybe needs to shift in some way because of that?
Yeah, not sometimes, every time.
Yeah.
I think the first couple pages of Saga #1 are describing the process of creating a comic. that when you are alone giving birth to something, you don't know, am I shitting or am I giving birth to a life? And you sometimes need two people to pull this thing out of the ether. Yeah, no, I am not a novelist. I don't start with a here's my fully formed vision. I just, I have half of the genetic material, and I'm looking for an equal co-author in this to help me find, is this shit? Is this a baby? Do we have so? Yeah, it is a thrilling when it works out, and it has so many times. I think entirely because I had a few years starting out where I was like, I am the writer, I'm the boss of this thing, I'm the director, and just having that beaten out of me and realizing like, oh no, that is comics is a visual medium. I'm part of a band, a group. I'm one player in this, but it is really, we all serve at the artist's pleasure, and that I work for the artist. And I think when I realized that I am not the star of the show, recognizing that, I think just my work got better, and the comics got better, and I'm just a happier human being, I think, knowing that I am here to help the artist shine, not vice versa.
You've also worked with some pretty incredible teams. Like I was thinking about the Paper Girls team, and it's really absurd when you think about it, because like Cliff, the next thing he does is Catwoman Lonely City, and he's doing literally everything on it besides flatting. But at the same time, he's doing everything on it, and he's just absolutely astonishing at it. Matt Wilson, low key, I don't know that many people know this, but is an awesome artist also, and an incredible photographer. But and then Jared K. Fletcher wasn't just a letterer; he's the designer too, and he like designs a lot of books incredibly well. You have this like versatile team, but I do think it's interesting though. This isn't a luck thing because you and your partners pick each other, but it's incredible looking at the teams you've worked with throughout the years. Even when we look at something like Y, where when Pia wasn't there, you had Paul Chadwick was on there. Goran Sudzuka was issue number 42 amongst other ones. Who was the other artist? There's one other artist I can't remember.
Goran Parloff.
The king. Yeah, and Massimo Carnevale on the covers and everything. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, it is. I don't know. I'm not trying to make this sound like some sort of like religious experience, but you've been pretty blessed. It's pretty great
from start to finish. And I mean, things like Paper Girls, that's all credit to Cliff. I think it's, he was felt very strongly from the beginning. He's like, oh, if we're going to do this, create our own thing. I think it's important that the letterer, the colorist, also have some skin in the game and some ownership. And, if we sell this as a TV show or a movie, that they're involved. And just that these are, this is not factory comics where this is just an assembly line and we're just passing it along to the next person.
Yeah.
That we are friends. We are a band, this team that goes out. And I think when you treat your fellow creators with that level of financial and creative respect, you see the results in the end product, that no one is just doing a job, that everyone is putting so much of themselves into it and going above and beyond. So yes, all credit to Cliff for that, who is, as you point out, not just an incredible writer and artist, but started out, as an editor and was sort of the de facto boss editor of our book and held it together. So I do try and pick people who fill in my many gaps for things that I'm not good at, and let them run with it.
I think it also helps. I mean, I know you're a huge original art fan, and you mentioned Fiona earlier, but I don't know. I mean, as a huge original art fan, it must be pretty amazing to, I don't know, writers talk about how when they get those emails with the art in for their book, that's the moment where they're just like, holy crap, like this is happening. Do you kind of still feel that sometimes when you get pages in?
Yeah, every single time. I got 11 pages yesterday from Fiona, and then I got a bunch of pages from Nico Henriksen.
Oh,
and I told my wife, I said, this is the best day of my life. I've never been so happy. I was just having, because they're not just good pages, but it's what they always are. It is so elevated beyond what I'd been anticipating. And in both examples, I've already seen, some pretty detailed thumbnails or layouts from them. So there aren't huge surprises, but there are huge surprises. They bring so much in that finished product. But yeah, I talk about a lot that seeing Y the Last Man #1, page 1, come over the fax machine back when we used to have fax machines, just slowly like scanned line by line as it's coming out. And like, as I'm seeing just 10% of Pia's page and then 20% and just each, as it's coming out, like, this is going to work. Oh my God, I think this might actually be a hit against all odds. So, and it still feels that exciting 20 years later. It never, ever gets old.
That's got to be the most dramatic way for a page of art to get revealed.
Totally. Totally. Now you just click a button and it's there instantaneously.
Boring.
So,
we just got to get back to faxing.
I agree. You're right.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse 2, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. It is pretty astonishing, like, looking at the mix. I do want to, one thing that works really well. I'm not trying to make this just complimenting your collaborators hour, but
please do.
I will say that you also work with very complimentary people, because Nico is one of the things I think is very underrated about Nico is you look at his Spectators pages and it's just beautiful. It's like the whatever is he painting that? Is he traditional or digital on that? I have no idea.
It starts out with digital and then goes to physical, so that end product that was hand painted, hand colored by him completely.
The thing about Nico's art that's really amazing though is it's like some of the most beautiful stuff you can possibly see and some of the most well crafted art you can possibly see. But he is, for my money, one of the best character acting artist in the business. Like, he did that Meet the Scrolls book with Robbie Thompson, and like his character acting in that book was astonishing. And it was like, it was a mini series, so maybe a lot of people skipped it, but at the same time, if you read that book, it is like a tour de force because of his character acting, and everyone you work with is so good in that regard. Cliff and Fiona, I mean, they're so brilliant in terms of like bringing a page to life, but those characters are just astonishing. I think that's a big part of the reason why people fall in love with the books is they can't help but love all the characters on the page just because they're so alive because of the artists.
Thank you for saying so. I agree. And it's a really underrated skill because I think there are many incredible artists out there in comics who are not good actors. Mm-hmm. And, their characters have 3 or 4 faces. You have like gritted teeth or something, but I could never change a line of dialogue after the art has come in because Fiona has tailored that facial expression exactly to that line of dialogue. And as Pia Guerra did, and Pia was really one of the first collaborators that I saw do that. And you just see how immediately you're like, oh, it reads completely different when you have great acting on the page. You could have it's beautifully laid out and, the inking is perfect. But if those expressions are wrong, the dialogue reads clunkier. And I think you are right that Pia, Fiona, Nico, everyone I've worked with, and anyone I've certainly have gone back and worked with again has been because first and foremost, the humanity that they bring to these 2-dimensional drawings through their unbelievable character skill.
Yeah, shouts to Fiona this week, by the way, because Mr. Jumpseat, who's a guy that is literally just made of eyes, doesn't have a traditional idea of a face, still acts the shit out of it, which is incredible.
It is. That scene is amazing. And yeah, the way she makes you care about people who have only existed for a few pages in the story. And they are absurd. And I described it as, he's a guy and he's got kind of like a bouquet of flowers, but they're more like eyeballs for a head. So just make that cool, Fiona. And it's such a dumb idea. And it should ruin the scene because it is an extremely dramatic scene about a traumatized immigrant to this planet. And it should just make it ridiculous. But I don't know. She somehow finds a way to bring this grounded pathos to these, just truly nutty ideas. It is amazing. Yeah.
It's also a pitch perfect combination with his outfit, where it's like the most generic kind of worker dude, button up shirt, gray slacks, belt combination. I'm like, this electrically odd person with a bouquet of flowers / eyes for a head, and then you have like office worker. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful combination. But well, okay. So I want to bring up another one of your collaborators. I'm skipping a few, but I want to talk about the Private Eye Panel Syndicate really quick. I've talked to Marcos a lot about it, and I always tell him that was you two going completely renegade. I love using the word renegade with Private Eye and Panel Syndicate because I feel like it describes it well. But we're going to talk about another of these later with Substack later on. But do unusual methods for releasing comics appeal to you, or was that Marcos sort of forcing you on a crazy adventure?
Yeah, the latter. No, nothing appeals to me about anything that is innovative. Usually, or I just want to be left alone and write my funny books. But I also recognize that yes, this is a privilege to be able to work this way. But I want to see more of this, where there are places for creators to be able to make a living wage for their work and to have zero creative interference, and also most importantly 100% control and ownership of their work. And I just saw that was becoming increasingly rare, and I'm worried that there are a lot of sort of IP farms masquerading as comic publishers. And I think it's kind of criminal for publishers to take any percentage of non-publishing rights, to take movie rights or any of these ancillary things. It's troubling to me. So I was like, it is not my natural inclination to go and try and start something new. But I think it's important when those things pop up, like Panel Syndicate, of here is a way, not just for me, but for other creators to be able to do this, that it's important, even though it's, yes, as you point out, not my natural inclination to go that direction.
One thing I really love about it, though, is so like when I was a kid, I would go into the comic shop and there might be a new X-Men issue in, or there might be a new Wolverine issue or something like that. And they would just show up when they show up, and I would have no idea what was going on. And now it feels like, I don't know, there's information overload to the point where I don't want to say it's anti-anticipation, but it kind of starts pushing against it. It's like when a new comic movie trailer comes out, and by the time the movie comes out, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so tired of this trailer. I just want the movie to come out, please God. The thing that I think is really amazing about Panel Syndicate and how you and Marcos and Munsa were just parachuting comics on us, it brought that feeling back. It brought that feeling of like complete surprise and just the magic of comics. They just appeared when they appeared. And, obviously that's still happening. You have like Alex DeCampi making comics on Panel Syndicate. You have Marcos and Ed doing Friday on there, and that's amazing. And it's really cool because it kind of short circuits the way that comics normally work and brings that feeling back from my youth in a very atypical way. I love it.
Oh, thanks. I agree. And I too love that, showing up at the store, and I'd have no idea what would be waiting for me on that Wednesday. But yeah, it's an exciting thing. It's really hard. Comics require such lead time that, that you see, now we're all treated to, oh, here's the solicit, here's the announcement, here's the solicitation for it. And you're right, by the time it finally arrives, you're almost like, haven't I read that story already? It's
yeah.
so much wrung out of it. So to not only be able to unexpectedly drop something, but, because I think Private Eye was sort of a learning experience, then we're like, well, let's really push it with Barrier. Let's put a book out that will surprise people that it's coming out, but we won't even tell them what kind of story it is. That usually you have whatever sort of dust jacket copy is there will tell you this is what the story is about, or you've read a solicit. Like, people will just read it and they won't know, or am I reading a Western, a sci-fi book, whatever. Is yes, the art of the surprise is really difficult to do with the internet and contemporary comics. So the fact that Marcos found a way to short circuit that is just another element of his insane genius.
You're kind of doing that with Spectators too. I mean, Spectators is fascinating because I mean this in the best way. It is a very good comic, but it is almost indescribable.
Yeah, I love that, because I think there will come a time in 20 or so pages that I think we'll finally arrived at, oh, I guess maybe we've hit a log line for this. But yeah, I wanted to be able to do something that you wouldn't know from page to page what kind of story even am I reading? And it's definitely, yeah, it felt like we had some creative capital to spend that I didn't have circa Why the Last Man. That Why the Last Man, nobody knows who the hell I am. So it feels like that elevator pitch has to be so airtight. It has to be so simple. That high concept has to be so high. And that has its own joys. But this was something different. And this way that we're releasing it, Nico and I realized that, oh, yeah, we could just tell people nothing. And some people hate that. Most people like knowing what kind of story they're getting into. I have some friends who like reading the last couple pages of a book before they start. And those like, okay, it looks like this will be worthwhile. I like to enter as blind as possible. I hate movie trailers. I want to watch as little of it. I just want to be surprised and delighted by people I trust.
Yeah.
So it's very cool to get to do that again in a new way.
One of my favorite movie experiences in probably like the last 5 or 10 years was the movie. I don't know if you saw this movie. It's a Nacho Vigalondo movie, Colossal, with Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis.
I did see that, yeah. Uh-huh.
It's a very fascinating movie. I did not know anything going into it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I went in and I was like, holy shit, what am I watching? But in a good way. It was really great. And I kind of love that because, I mean, there's 2 different layers to this too for Spectators. We'll jump into it now because, we're here already, but it's your original graphic novel. You're serializing on Substack with your pal, Nico Henrichon, and Phonographics, your constant collaborator these days on lettering, and I presume probably other things because he's a tremendous designer. But the 2 layers of it is like, 1, it's hard to describe, and 2, it's kind of evolving. It continues to evolve, and I think that's really fascinating. It's like you even said it yourself. We're not really where the story is yet. It's just like we're getting a feel for what the story is so far.
Yeah, I wanted to get back and do a graphic novel, which I had not done since Pride of Baghdad. And it just felt like, yeah, I had for so long been working at 22 pages a clip. And, you end with this cliffhanger and go on from there. And I was like, I've written so many comic books that have roughly 5 scenes of, 4 or 5 pages each. And this was the first time that I could just luxuriate in Spectators opens with a 20+ page scene in one location.
Mm-hmm.
And that was thrilling. And then to know that, yeah, you could start out looking like, oh, I guess this is maybe going to be a romance comic. And like, oh, maybe it's going to be this sort of weird porny thing. And then it's something extraordinarily violent. And then it changes a lot and will continue to evolve. We're not done yet. I think that's a perfectly valid way to tell a story. It's sometimes a hard way to market a serialized story. But again, Substack sort of found a way to thread that needle, that we're not releasing it a chapter at a time like conventional comics. It's meant ultimately to be read in one sitting. But we realized, by telling it just 2 or 3 pages a week, it's going to become an entirely different experience for those people who are willing to come along in this fashion. And it's been very rewarding to watch it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things is I remember talking to Ed Brubaker about Friday, and he was saying about how Marcos had told him that basically people still want Ed was talking about how he wanted to write scripts that were like 12 pages, and Marcos told him, he's like, well, it'd probably be better if we were like still in like the 20 to 24 or whatever, because that's kind of what people expect and you want them to have good experience and everything like that. But one thing I like about Spectators so far is that sometimes it's just a really amazing double page spread that comes out on a Monday. Sometimes it's just like an astonishing single visual. Sometimes it's 5 pages. Sometimes it's 2, whatever. You can do whatever you want. And I think that's one of the interesting things about Substack versus, for example, like Panel Syndicate. I remember when it was announced that you were, doing Exploding Giraffe on Substack, I saw some people say like, why doesn't he just do it on Panel Syndicate? To me, it's like, obviously they're like completely different platforms. One, Panel Syndicate's not going to give you a grant to do it there. 2, it gives you all the same flavors that you get there, where you own all of the rights to it. You don't lose publishing rights, you don't lose movie rights, you don't lose anything. Basically, it's just like post on this thing 2 times a week, and here's some money to do whatever you want, so Nico can get paid to do like the best work he possibly can. And you can also do it however you want. And like that's one of the things I think is interesting, is you can deliver it the cadence that feels right to you rather than what is expected of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And there was a lot of talk at the beginning of, should we wait to bank, until we have every 20 pages we'll release something? Because it seems to be the conventional wisdom is people do like a nice, satisfying chunk of story. And I understand that. But I guess in this relatively recent collecting original art obsession of mine, getting to read these old like Terry and the Pirate strips of like, oh, how when people were able to just get 3 panels a day of a story, is there a way for that to be satisfying? And there definitely is. You realize that you can convey a lot, and I guess that was the other counterintuitive thing. Like, oh, if we're only going to give them, 3 or 4 pages a week, those pages should be incredibly dense with as many panels and as much information so they get their money's worth. But I don't think that's true. It's not about that density. It is about emotion. Is that what can you convey with one page that will make someone want to come back for more? And yeah, I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And I recognize it's certainly not for everyone. And there are plenty of people who are like, I don't want to hear another word until there's something I can hold in my hands. I'll wait for it until then. But I think there have been some curious people who are like, let's give this a shot. And I think it's really fun to every Monday there's something there and you don't know exactly what you're going to get from us, but it's been very cool.
I think people like the adventure part of it. They like, I mean, to a certain degree. I think some people want to go along on the ride with you, and I think that's a really interesting thing. I also think that the idea of what works in comics has shifted in recent years. Like, there was always an idea that miniseries didn't work, and in recent years, minis have done really well, and even in the direct market. Like, one of my favorite comics is a web comic that's on like 15 platforms, and I read it on Instagram. It's called False Knees, and it's just these little comics about typically birds engaging with their lives and neuroses and all kinds of random things. And it's just like 4 panels, and it comes out like every once in a while. It comes out at whatever cadence, and the guy's turned it into like a personal empire, basically. That's a dramatic way to put it, but he's doing really well with it. And I do think the idea of what comics have to be has shifted to a certain degree. And the beautiful thing about this too is at the end of it, you and Nico are going to have a 300-page graphic novel that you can publish somewhere, because that's how it works.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does still feel too good to be true, but it's also, I know everyone is waiting. We're hopeful that we haven't even sort of approached potential publishers or printing partners, but it was. I think the other important thing about Substack is true creative freedom. That there's no censorship whatsoever, and I knew that would be important with the amount of nudity and sexuality, which a lot of people have hangups with. But, spoiler alert for those who haven't read it, it does open with an extraordinarily graphic mass shooting. And that is something that I think for a lot of unfortunate economic reasons, you as a creator are not allowed to write about. And it's, anytime you do, you're like, well, we can't release it because there was just a mass shooting this week. There will always be mass shootings in this country. And there's such reluctance to talk about it in fiction, I think for not very good reasons. And I was like, oh, here is a place where we can just go. And I think we're not done touching on subjects that I think in this day and age, a lot of people don't want maybe creators to talk about, a lot of third rail things. So it's been exciting. So I don't know, when we're done with it, it might only ever exist online. I don't know if but we'll see. But for right now, I love that it's all there, that you can read it anytime you want to. And most importantly, that like Panel Syndicate, it is 100% free, that you can go up anytime and read. Right now there are 50 pages of breathtaking Nico Henderson art that you can read absolutely for free. And if you would like more, there are plenty of opportunities. And if you want to donate to help us complete this journey, you can, but you don't have to. So it just feels like such a win-win-win.
I love the combination of Exploding Giraffe as the name, which stems from Pride of Baghdad for listeners that don't know, because Giraffe's head literally explodes in there. Poor Giraffe, just like minding his own business and just gets exploded. Just terrible. And then like the group, the people who are subscribers, they get to comment and participate in the discussion. They're called the Tower because giraffes in a group are a tower. I had no idea.
Yeah, me neither. But it's so cool, and I like, because it sounds like such a Ponzi scheme or like a cult that I'm part of the Tower.
Yeah.
But I was at the San Diego Zoo on vacation with my kids Badlands, and we were seeing a bunch of giraffes, and they revealed there it was called a tower. Everything sort of clicked. I was like, this is too good to be true. But yeah, Pride of Baghdad is one of the things I'm most proud of in my life. But there's just that one moment where, as the Baghdad Zoo is coming under fire, where a giraffe is killed and his head explodes. And about once a week, I'll be pinged by it. Someone on Twitter will have rediscovered it. And there's just this constant, what the hell is this? And even before we started this, if you search the words exploding giraffe, Nico and I were the first thing that would come up. And I was like, well, this is too good not to glom onto. I suppose this is what we're known for.
Yeah, the SEO gods have already blessed you. You gotta lean into that.
Exactly. That's right. That's right.
And now, a quick word from one of Off-Panel's sponsors. It's Bad Idea still. I have good news. They got back to me on a script for an ad. I also have bad news. They told me to come up with it because they're busy baking. So I hear they're making donuts now? I don't know what's going on. Bad Idea is over. Let's get back to the podcast. It is interesting what you said earlier about how, like, you can't avoid these subjects because these things are constants. I mean, like, even look at Pride of Baghdad. Pride of Baghdad, it's like people are still being bombed all the time. And, you know, especially coming off a week that we had this week with, you know, looking at Spectators and everything like that. I do think it's interesting. Like, you can't just stop telling stories because bad things happen, because they just kind of always happen. But how do you balance that need to be honest with your stories with the reality we face at times? Is that a difficult balance at all? Or is it just, you just kind of have to shut that out and be true to your story?
I think, I remember with Ex Machina pitching that nervously to DC, and I pitched it not long after 9/11. And for listeners who don't know, Ex Machina involves a former superhero who is on 9/11 was able to stop one of the planes from flying into one of the towers. And I mean, if that seems insensitive or callous now to turn that event into a superhero comic, I mean, imagine, you know, in 2002, and
right.
There was such a sense of, is this too soon to be doing this? And I just, as a creator, I would always much rather be too soon than too late.
Right.
Like, why not? This is what we're here for. And I know, like, Garth Ennis always hates when a writer's something like, oh, I feel a need to respond to the pandemic or whatever. And I don't want to make it sound like I have these preachy, I want to get up on my soapbox, and I would write a editorial column if I knew that. That is not why I write, to try and tell people how to think. It is just, this is what I'm living through at this moment. How am I supposed to write about anything else than what is going on right now? Isn't that what writers are for? Isn't that what we do? So, and comics give you the freedom to not have to worry about that. That film and television is so expensive that you have to take the audience in mind. And you have to think about the finances of it, and it automatically leads to self-censorship of like, there's so many reasons not to tell a story with, involving a mass shooting. You're going to alienate at least half of your audience. This is, either because they're on one side of the debate or because they just don't want to deal with this. And comics is just, who cares? The barrier of entry is so low. It's so relative to film and television to get in, that why not take a chance and do something that, yes, much of your audience might say, I hate this and I don't want it, and that is fine. They do not have to read it, and it usually takes a lot of work to even seek out these comics. So I don't worry about offending or stepping on toes. I just want to tell the stories I want to tell.
It kind of like what you were saying kind of reminds me of, do you watch Barry on HBO by chance?
I think this season has been one of the great TV shows ever. Yeah, it's amazing.
There was, I think it was the most recent episode, Joplin, one of the characters' TV shows was being canceled on the day it was like revealed. It was released. There's this TV exec who says that if someone eats dessert in the first 2 minutes of the season, they'll almost always finish the season. And that kind of reminded me of what you were talking about, in the sense that everything always gets 4-quadranted when it comes to this stuff, where it has to fit within these parameters that don't make any sense, but an algorithm makes it make sense. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, like, look at Saga. Saga's a perfect example of that. If you tried to like reverse engineer what a hit looks like, it probably would not have looked like Saga, but Saga's a massive hit because it's authentic and it is what it is, and people connect with that aspect. I mean, you look through any any edition of To Be Continued, I have to say this issue's To Be Continued was one of the most, I don't know, intense and poignant ones you've ever had. It was a lot, and like people really share themselves with it because they see themselves in the book, and like you can't reverse engineer something people feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. That scene there was, my stomach turned just because, oh, this is written from such an honest place of people who have heard these things. But yeah, I've worked on TV shows before where I got to sit in on, the sort of audience testing, where it's like that Poochie episode of Simpsons where they hand a bunch of people little dials and they get to watch your show live. And
so weird.
Yeah, you see the numbers go up, and there's always some old guy who's been there forever. And I was working on something that had a character unfolded a map on a hood, and this old guy was like, "Get ready to see all the fellas' numbers go up." And sure enough, you could see they differentiate between male and female viewers, and you just see the men numbers skyrocket. They love seeing maps, and then it becomes like, well, they love seeing maps. How can we put more maps into this
Oh my God.
show? And this is the sort of letting the algorithm dictate how shows get made. There are benefits to it. You figure out like, oh, this is what keeps eyeballs glued to a screen, but that is obviously not, has nothing to do with great storytelling, which is about sort of shutting out the rest of the world and you and your collaborators reaching deep into yourself and trying to pull out something weird and strange to share with people. That has nothing to do with audience testing or feedback or trying to second guess what they want. So a luxury to be able to do that in comics still.
I feel so called out. I love maps. I love them.
Me too. I get it. We all do. But you can only squeeze so many into that pilot episode of your TV show.
Yeah, that'd be a really weird show if it was just like 30 to 60 minutes of maps. At that point, you're like, what are we making here? Is this a show anymore? Is this just like a YouTube series about like showing maps? I mean, I bet that would be a big hit. But
David, as you're talking, I think we could go pitch this right now. It's called Maps.
It's going to be massive.
It's an iconic title. And it sounds good.
It's like Stanley Tucci searching for Italy, but it's just showing maps. And we'll have Stanley Tucci host it. That'll be a 4-quadrant hit right there. But, I am curious, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but you have this amazing dichotomy of your two big communities right now. Saga's To Be Continued is powered by snail mail, while Exploding Giraffe is comic books via email newsletter. It seems to me as an outsider, like the former is more of your natural way. But are you enjoying putting yourself out there in such a way with Substack, like doing the podcasting with Garth Ennis and Becky Cloonan, connecting with the audience, doing the posting? I got to give you a quick shout out because you do a really good job of asking questions because your comment threads are just exploding all the time. Do you enjoy that part of it?
Yeah, I do. And I missed, before Saga, there was the old bkv.tv, which is a website. I think someone told me it's been taken over by a pornographic dating site for elderly women or something. So
all right.
Please don't go to that site anymore. But it used to be just a web page with an old school message board. And it was lovely. It was just such a nice, I guess I'm such a narcissist to just say that I like people who read my books, but it turns out that we tend to have similar interests. So no, I don't mind it. I guess the connection between the two is this sort of filter of, because Saga only accepts physical mail, you have to find a stamp and take the time. It's so few jerks are going to take the time to just write you nasty things and to mail it to you, that it really filters it out. And I think Substack is similarly, there are ways, that we try to open those comment threads are exclusive to the paid subscribers. And I think that is nice because I greatly prefer, I'd say that, to things like Twitter or Instagram, where it feels like, oh, I've become a shadow employee of these horrible corporations. And I so resent writing for free. I find that really distasteful. And I just so take pride in, from early on, I felt like my writing has worth and has value. And even if it's just $5 a page, which was my original rate at Marvel Comics a million years ago, at least that's something. well, they called it a tryout rate, I think was, but yeah, I got paid $5 a page for my first job. I did a little better my second, but look, that's more than anyone is getting paid on Twitter, Instagram
That's
to
true.
do that. So I feel like that is a borderline criminal, again, to overuse that word. But so yeah, I don't mind doing this when yeah, at least I'm being paid for my writing, and Twitter and Instagram I'm not. So yeah, I'm all for it.
It reminds me of I have a comic site Sketch that I write about a wide variety of things. But I remember when I first closed it, I ran it for a year and I just got really burned out. And I remember Heidi McDonald, your former editor, wrote an article about it saying basically that, this is what happens when people don't pay for sites. When people don't get paid for their work is they shut it down. And I remember being like, Heidi, you don't know what you're talking about. I didn't shut it down because I wasn't getting paid. And then I brought Sketch back because I really I'm a big sports fan, so I subscribed to The Athletic. And I remember reading an interview with one of the people who runs that, and it's a subscription-based thing. And they said even charging $1 a month completely changes the complexion of their comments. It goes because it filters out all the people who are just going to go in there and be mean about stuff all the time, because if you got to pay for it, you're not going to do it. And so I started doing that. And first off, Heidi was completely right. It completely changed my level of burnout when I realized I was actually getting paid for the work I was doing. And two, it was like it completely changed how people engage with the site. Like I remember this one person that got really mad in theory about my article because there was like this Comicsgate group got really mad at me because I said that they were jerks and blah blah blah. And this guy emailed me and he's like, "You're a coward because you block your comments to people who don't subscribe." And I'm like, "I'll tell you what. If you subscribe and pay me, you can say all the mean comments you want in the comments."
Absolutely.
He did not do that.
Yeah, no, but that's such a bizarre sense of entitlement that we don't, it's not our job to sit here and respond to every angry crank who has some complaint. That is just, life is too short. So, yeah, any way to help filter that out is good by me.
It's very lovely. But okay, we'll close with talking about Saga. It's your image series with Fiona Staples and phonographics. I describe it, but I feel like everyone reads it, so they know what's up. But, I did want to start with that. Everyone does read it. Number 55 was the highest ordered issue yet, wasn't it?
It was shockingly. It must be the first time in comic book history that issue 55 of anything was the highest selling number.
Well, I mean, I did a feature on talking to retailers about how it was working. And one of the fascinating things was I talked to this one retailer named Katie Pride from Books with Pictures in Portland, Oregon.
Sure.
And she told me that trade waiters had pre-ordered the first issue back. They were going to go back to trade, but they just wanted to be part of it. And I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. Was that is a type of behavior that literally never happens. It just never happens. And like that type of thing was happening because I don't know. I do think it's interesting. It's like the community aspect of Saga is something that is so important, but also kind of impossible to reinvent because it just happens naturally. But it's like so powerful because it's like these people change their buying behavior strictly so they could feel like they're part of something. And that's really cool.
I hope a few of them stuck around for 56 after. That was definitely the goal. I don't mind trade waiters. That is, I don't care how you read Saga. It is an honor and deeply flattering. So if people just wait to read it at the library or read it digitally or whatever, it's fine by me. But I love monthly comics and not just, I guess I do to be continued to try and help inspire people or encourage them to read the comic monthly just because I like it. I like experiencing just a little bit of these characters' lives a month at a time. And I just think there's so many people who have read Why the Last Man. They binged it in a weekend, in a day even, and that's cool. That is a totally valid way to experience it, but it is such a different experience than those people who went along for this monthly march and got to see Yorick grow up in real time. And similarly, as if you choose to endure the hellish wait between issues, I think there's something special about the experience of monthly comics and getting to watch Hazel age more or less in real time, I think is cool. And I just think it also encourages people to shop at their local stores instead of waiting to, order it from a place online. So I love monthly comics creatively, financially, everything about them. But I hope some of those trade waiters we were able to bring over, but if they're trade waiting still, it's fine by me.
I think you do a really good job of making the single issue form, for lack of a better word, valuable. There's a community aspect with to be continued and everything like that. You obviously have you're famous for your cliffhangers, the final page gut punches you're so good at. Even like the $2.99 price point, like that type of thing, it lowers the barrier to entry and encourages people to stick around. And I think it's interesting because Saga is like the comic you can't miss and then don't want to miss because it's like a part of you. I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to a retailer who's told me if I could just have one more Saga, my job would be so much easier.
It is very nice, and I feel bad. I wish that there were, such sadness when we went on that extended hiatus. I had a lot of retailers like we were counting on this, and so it is a large responsibility. I know, but also I felt confident that things will fill the Saga void.
Oh yeah,
there definitely, obviously, have been so many, and now it's we have to come back and compete with all of these cool young upstarts now that we're no longer the hot new thing. But thank you for pointing out the $2.99, because that's a great thing about Image that I never had anywhere else. You had no say in how much that your books cost, but that's entirely up to us. And I think it's probably I think a lot of voices inside Image are like, why not make it $3.99? That so many books are at least $3.99, and most of them are shorter than Saga. That they've been chipping away at story pages, so they're 20 pages instead of 22. But I still think $2.99 is expensive to me, and I'm doing pretty well for myself. But when I see $4.99 or something for a comic, it does feel like this is a lot. And I know there are even retailers who are like, we would make more money if you charge $3.99 versus $2.99. But I don't know that that's true. I do think that there's a large section of the audience that picks up the book that is grateful that something costs just $2.99. So I hope that we'll be able to keep selling it, even as with inflation, with the cost of paper is out of control.
Yeah.
It's like we're still doing just fine. Obviously, we make such a windfall on the collections, but we do incredibly well at $2.99 for sales, which makes me think if there's any Marvel and DC books that are outselling Saga, why aren't they also $2.99? But that's a question for those folks.
I do think, this kind of connects with Private Eye. I think one of the nice things, and part of the reason why Private Eye did as well as it did, besides the fact it's really good, is that, it had that if you wanted to pay $4.99, you could pay $4.99. But if you only had $1 to spend, or if you had $0 to spend, you could do that. And it all netted out, if I remember correctly, basically either at or north of your Marvel rates, which is no one could have predicted. But I do think that there is a certain level of accessibility that is given when there's a lower price point like that at $2.99. I don't think I'm not saying this is the entire reason why Spawn is popular again, but I don't think it hurts that Spawn's only $2.99 either. And I think that makes a difference. I mean, I've heard the same thing from retailers that they could make more money off of it, but at the same time, it's if readers find that to be imposing, then you lose readers, and then it starts like the attrition drain, and that's an entirely different problem. I don't know. I like that it's $2.99.
But I think you're right, and that attrition then leads to we have this dwindling base of readers. So then, how do we squeeze more and more money out of our dwindling base by just putting out more and more books that cost more money? It just feels like this is not a way to grow this industry, to grow this medium. So yeah, if you talk with Marcos, I'm sure you've heard him talk about why he started Panel Syndicate, which is he loved comics because it was an inexpensive medium for the masses when we were kids. And comics is now kind of a luxury hobby for the well-off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's disappointing. And so he was like, look, we're two old Luddite, technologically incompetent people, but could we just take what we love about comics and use the internet to bring that aspect of comics back, to democratize it, to have it be an inexpensive medium for everyone? And I was like, no, Marcos, we can't. That's a dumb idea. People are just all going to download the book for free, or they're not going to read it at all, or this is stupid, and you're a socialist ninny. And it turns out that son of a bitch was right. So yeah, it's incredible. The panel syndicate is still, this many years later, how many comics companies, how many entertainment companies, empires have risen and fallen in the time that Marcos has kept panel syndicate just plugging along is it's heroic.
It's like 257 kibis, I think, or quibis. I don't remember how to pronounce that.
That's right.
It's a lot of those, but this is. I feel like it's related in a sense. Is that part of the reason why you've never done variants for Saga? Is that you just want to make it about the story? It just is what it is.
Yeah, I think we did like one or two at one point, but yeah, it was. Yes, I have a lot of concerns about variants, but the first one is creatively. It just felt like when I was reading Watchmen as a kid, that each one of those Watchmen covers, that was the first panel and the most important panel of that story. And that covers weren't a marketing tool, they were a vital part of this medium. And Fiona's covers are, yeah, it is not just an invitation to read this. It's part of the story. That is the first thing that you see. It sets the tone for it. It matters so much that, yeah, I just want to see those Fiona covers. So I know we have no shortage of incredible artists who have offered, and we're leaving, I'm sure, so much money on the table by not putting out a ton of these books. But yeah, it does feel like, I just remember the first time I accidentally bought a comic twice because it was a different cover. And I just kind of felt burned. And I was like, oh, I already have this. And like, as a writer, I'm like, I'm getting paid again for this. But really, this person was only picking it up because of the cover artist. Like, really, if you're drawing a variant cover, you should be getting everyone's page rate for this. And that's not the case. It's, you get paid your regular rate. I think artists should be paid at least double if they're doing a variant. I think there's much of this industry is sort of propped up on this house of cards of how many variants can you sell. And I'm a little worried about that house of cards potentially crashing down, but it hasn't happened yet. And I know everyone's like, Brian, you're a buzzkill. We like variants. It'd be fun to have 35 different Goose covers to Saga. We would buy them all. And I get it, but it's just like, it feels greedy when you're doing well. And when we're doing fine, it feels like let's just let Fiona's covers be it. But if you see when issue 60 comes out, if it has 60 different variant covers, then I was a big liar and I've changed my mind. I need a boathouse or something. Maybe I'll start doing them. But for now, no, I'm very happy to be variant free with my books.
It's a very good path to a boathouse, I imagine. But I will say Saga 34 might be on the short list of my favorite covers ever. The one with Goose and Friendo fishing on the in the water. Like, that one is just astonishing. It's like, I don't know. I just don't, I don't know. How does it get better than Fiona's covers? It's so good. It's crazy. And I'm with you. Also, I've accidentally bought variants before, and it's just kind of, I'm like, I actually, one of my rules on my pull list is that they kept doing me a favor at my shop of giving me variants as like a thank you for doing this. And I'm like, I don't want variants. No variants. That is one of my rules on my pull list. I have no problem with it. It's just normally I like A covers because they're designed to be tied to the story. It's like, like I think a really iconic element of Paper Girls was the design that you all, mostly Cliff, I guess, but I mean, like the colored, like the hot pink or yellow or whatever, like that became like something I feel like people emulated afterwards. And it's because it was done very deliberately in a way that would serve the book perfectly. And also like the neon was perfect for, the 80s element of it.
Oh man, if you go back and feel the heavy stock of the so cover that Cliff had selected for Paper Girls, and it cost an absolute fortune.
Oh my God.
And I was like, to what end? How many people are noticing this? And yet Cliff was like, this is really important to me to have our book, not just the way it looks, but the way it feels. I fully support it. So yeah, I'm endlessly grateful to work with collaborators who feel the same way as I do, that it's fine. If we are leaving some money on the table, that's okay. If we're just so proud of this finished product that we couldn't imagine a variant version of it. And plus, living in this COVID age, isn't just the word variant taken on such a sad, scary, I feel like variants are passe. So I'm done with variants. let's just moving on to just one strain of Saga at a time, please.
There we go. I'm with Cliff, though. I'm a paper stock guy. I mean, when I was having my comic book garage sale this weekend, I was talking about, somebody was talking about Crossover, Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw's book over at Image. And I was like, they were like, oh yeah, I love this book. I'm like, did you feel that paper stock on #1? It was unbelievable. And I think this person was like, who is this Martian? What are you talking about? Okay, well, just a few more questions on Saga. I'm curious as to how you felt when you were coming back from the hiatus. When it went through the announcement and, it was up for order and all this stuff like that, were you concerned at all about how retailers and fans were going to react? Or were you just, it's going to be what it's going to be?
Yeah, I think I knew it was going to be what it was going to be, because any fears I'd had were put to rest. The first time that we decided, okay, we're at issue 6 of Saga, it was like, this is impossible for one artist. Fiona draws and colors every, inch of this 22 pages plus a cover. She can't do this monthly. So we're going to have to take a break. And knowing that, we're also not going to do fill-in artists, because who could possibly fill in for Fiona Staples?
Right.
And there was definitely sense inside Image, and I've read conventional wisdom was, we are doomed. That when you take that break, retailers sort of base their orders on, how this did. And like when you just disappear, readers stop reading, retailers stop ordering, you're doomed. And so, yeah, I really thought in between Saga 6 and 7 that we would see such a drop off. And that was our first real big leap up, that 7 did much better than 6. That sort of giving everyone a break, giving people time to get caught up it's okay. It's like you recognize Marvel and DC have this sort of fiduciary need to keep the train constantly going, but it's soul crushing as a creator, and it's hard. And I've been lucky to work with quote unquote fill-in artists. It's weird to call someone like Paul Chadwick a legend, a fill-in artist.
Right.
That was an extraordinary experience, and I'm so grateful that the editors at Vertigo were able to balance that in a way that I really think that story still feels like a cohesive whole. But yeah, I'm not interested in just pumping out product.
Right.
And so no, I knew we had to go away, and I guess I was sort of armed with this secret knowledge. I knew that Fiona was considering starting a family, and I just know, like, who cares about this? Like, this book means so much to us. But at the end of the day, it's a comic, and that we're writing about families. But if we're sacrificing the well-being of our own families for this comic about a fictional family, this is such a perversion of why we're doing this. Just knowing Fiona needs time away, and I certainly did too, to reconnect with my own family, that this will just be good for the book.
Yeah.
And so if we come back, and yeah, we only have half the audience we did before, but we're telling the story that we want to tell, that's fine. And we can afford to lose much more of our audience. And sometimes it seems like I'm deliberately trying to push them away with the awful things we do to these beloved characters. But no, I think Fiona and I know, like, we have a plan. And, this is going to be 18 volumes and 108 issues. And, I know how it ends, even if Fiona refuses to let me spoil her with the ending. But, so however long it takes to get there, I'm fine with it. And I'm sorry to retailers, it's not more dependable, or readers, that we're not putting out 2 comics a month or whatever. But it seems like everyone is so lovely and agrees that, whatever wait anyone has to endure to get as much Fiona as possible is always worth it. And, there will be hiatuses again, but we will never again take the kind of break that we did this time. So that halfway point, we know that was indulgent, and to have a pandemic on top of everything else, extended it beyond, I think, anything we had imagined. But no, I think there will be much more Saga to come. So I feel good about it.
I mean, that's something I think people have a tendency of forgetting about when it comes to entertainment in general. It's just the human element of it, that there's always like a person behind these things, whether it's a movie, a show, a comic, whatever. And the last few years have had as many trials and tribulations as possible. And it's also worth saying, congratulations to Ben and Fiona on their second child. That is amazing. You said that in the most recent issue, and that's wonderful to hear. But I've long had a theory. I have a fan theory about Saga that is not about the comic itself. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
I think that Saga is a perfect example of absence making the heart grow fonder, because one, I feel like Saga was, I mean, I'm not saying this is the only reason why it's is a popular comic. There's a lot of reasons. Fiona's art, your writing, the community, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it helped that you were out of, because you finished Ex Machina with number 50 in, I think, like August of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when it was published. And then you were off. There was no new comics from you for about 2 years. And then Saga arrived, and it was like there was all this pent up interest, and I think that was like a part of it. And then I think the hiatus was really fascinating because it allowed a lot of people who were behind to catch up and then start telling their friends. And then podcasts like I listened to Binge Mode, a Ringer podcast, and Binge Mode was very supportive of it. And all these people were buying the book because of it. And it amplified word of mouth when there was this gap coming back. So by the time it came back, it wasn't just the people who were reading it in single issues or trades before that were doing it. It was like legions more. And I do think that sometimes there can be value, like there was value in that gap. Like I don't know if you continued on if you would have had the same jump in the next arc. I think that the jump happened at least in part because you and Fiona just took some time, and the audience just was building that whole time.
Oh, thanks. I agree with you 100% that it is nice to give readers an opportunity to miss you, which in comics usually you're so omnipresent. You're just you're always there. And I'd recognize that in having done a few long form ongoing series, Ex Machina and Runaways and Why, that you definitely reach a point where interest, wanes, or people are like, I just have so many copies piled up. I haven't, that there is a real benefit to just going away. And there's not much other fiction. This is how we're talking about Barry. How long do we have between seasons of Barry?
Right.
I think people are used to seasons of entertainment and getting something, Better Call Saul at a good clip, and then it goes away for a bit. But this idea that comics must appear every month indefinitely, I think, is born out of commerce and not necessarily out of the creative value of it. So, but yeah, again, a luxury that, Fiona and I made, I think, more money not publishing Saga during those 3 years than we did publishing Saga leading up to it. So thank God for Image, and just thank God for retailers who weren't like, well, forget this booklet. They kept selling it, and people kept reading it when we were away. And because Image lets us benefit from it, we were able to take that time away and to be with our families and to come back strong. So yeah, I'm just filled with endless gratitude for every step of the way for people who've allowed this to happen. And I can't believe we're back, and I can't believe I'm lucky enough that I'll get to keep doing this for several more years with Fiona. It is a great thrill.
You also had Taco Bell commercials, which I was astonished and delighted to read in To Be Continued this week that somebody actually discovered the comic because of the Taco Bell commercial. Never in a million years would I have expected somebody to like jump onto Saga because they were watching the Cincinnati Bengals on TV and saw a Taco Bell ad that convinced them to read it. That is an amazing introduction to comics story.
Yeah, it was thrilling and a mysterious, strange event that I promise someday to reveal more about in Exploding Giraffes. I'm afraid you'll have to join up.
That's fine.
If you want the truth behind how that happened. But it is one of the many surreal Saga-related things that I am grateful for Fiona for bringing into my life. That was wild.
Okay, the last question on Saga. I did want to bring up, so it's 108 issues. It's 18 trades. It is, I think a really fascinating thing about it is like you have always really focused on finite stories, but also often simultaneously ongoing stories. So like 108 issues, 10 years ago, saying a comic was, maybe 12 years ago, saying a comic was going to be over 100 issues would be normal. Now, I think, I'm not saying that this with certainty because I can't predict the future, but you might be telling the last new non-Big Two 100 issue story in comics, just because of the way that like market has changed. There's relaunches, a series are shorter, everything like that. It seems crazy, but it might be true. But I am interested in, when it comes to the finite stories like that, is it just your preference to go in knowing that there's a beginning, middle, and end, and that you're not just going to continue on eternally just because you found success? That you like, do you feel like that is more fertile creative ground for you?
I mean, something like Runaways, I was like, "Well, I'm not going to write the end of Runaways." I felt like I had benefited from the work of other creators working at Marvel. So I wanted to throw some toys back into the proverbial toy box, and
Mm-hmm.
knowing that, it'll be fun to write something and not know, hope that it will live on beyond me. But after that, I think it was like, endings are what I love, and endings are what give stories their meaning. And yeah, so it's, tempting to be like, I miss working with Pia. I miss those characters. I miss working with Tony Harris on Ex Machina. And every once in a while, I'm like, oh, I've got an idea for something, but I would rather do something new with those two, and sort of let that story have its ending.
Yeah.
Again, it feels like some things are just not allowed to end because there's this corporate mandate that, like, this thing's making money, squeeze every nickel you can out of it, tell every untold story, fill in every gap. But that's not really stories at that point. That's just creating some sort of franchise to prop up some company. So yeah, I love things that are finite, whether that's, 6 issues of We Stand on Guard with Steve Skroce, or 108 hopefully issues with Fiona. I like stories with beginning, middle, and ends, which is a bizarre thing to say. That's what a story is, but only in comics do we
Yeah.
have this sort of illusion of the third act, that you just, Batman doesn't have a final story. It keeps going forever.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but not where my strengths lie.
I mean, you're talking to the person who's I'm like the God, is it Jehovah's Witnesses? I don't know. I basically go door to door telling people as much as they possibly can to read Xander Cannon's Kaiju Max, because I think it's like the best thing in comics and forever. And also,
good call.
Completely finite. Each season, 6 issues, 6 seasons. Everyone read Kaiju Max. You should. Anyways, I'm going to close with 2 last questions. One is very specific to... I came across this in an interview with you where you said, for me, comics were always the destination, not the roadmap. Obviously, you have a lot of opportunities available to you. I mean, just looking through the past few years, like, there have been a number of articles that have popped up where you're like scripting something like a Gundam movie, if I remember correctly. What always brings you back to comics?
It's the best. It's the best visual medium that's ever been created. And I love film and I love television, but they're show business. And show business is always business first. And there are people who can navigate that well and know how to balance telling that art and commerce to get it through. But I find it extremely challenging. And the sort of the limitations of film and television are great. And comics are unlimited because it is always art first and commerce a distant second in those concerns. So you can just tell anything you want to with a small group of creators. That's just what's so exciting to me, being part of that. I love collaborating. I find it really hard to work with hundreds of people, as you need to do in film and television, but a tight-knit group of 3 or 4 folks putting something together, that's infectious. That is, you can do anything with that. So yeah, it's my favorite medium. It's the one that I'll do until I die. Yeah, comics. But I'm also grateful to take the check for the screenwriting work and stuff too. And it is not just that. It is its own unique world, and I love getting to work with musicians and things that comics can't offer. So I don't want to completely shit on film and TV. I do like them, but they pale in comparison to comics. So it does break my heart a little when people are like, who do you want to play this person in the Saga movie? Or who's like, I don't know, that there's somehow a Saga film or a Saga cartoon or a Saga something would elevate it, that that's the best possible thing that could happen to comics,
Right.
when the best possible thing that could have happened to that story is Fiona Staples. It's already happened. So I love adaptations. Obviously, everyone be on the lookout for Paper Girls coming to Amazon Prime soon. But that's gravy. That is an added blessing to us that we hope will bring more people to the graphic novel. But it was never the goal.
Yeah.
It was just a lovely side benefit. But for us, comics, that's always been the dream.
Well, I mean, it goes back to that scene I mentioned from Barry. It's like something like Spectators. I can't imagine what those execs would have said about Spectators. They'd be like, okay, first off, the algorithm hates all of this.
Yes.
But then the amazing thing about that is like you can have an idea and you can turn it. I'm not saying it's quick. Like Nico would probably slap me in the face when I was like, oh, yeah, comics are quick. And he's like, no, not quick.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, it's like relative. If you have an idea and you have the ability to tell it, you can make a comic and make it what you want it to be with little oversight. I mean, like there's literally not an editor to Spectators. It's just you two doing what you do best. Well, you and Phonographics doing what you do best. And there's something amazing about that. There's something magical about that. And it's like I think that something that's been said a lot is like, the only limitation to comics is your imagination. And that's not always necessarily true, but
sure,
I think it's partially true. And that's closer than most things get.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes, because it's easy to say anything is possible. And then your poor artist is like, oh, and Nico, please draw all of Manhattan hundreds of years in the future. And I'm going to need to see inside every window. And well, he actually did that.
Yes.
So that's a bad example. But there are things that, yes, that you can do that will tax your artist beyond comprehension. But yeah, yes, you are right. For the most part, comics, you can do anything. So when you come to comics, why would you just do, here's the movie I've always wanted to tell, or here's that, just go do it? Because frankly, it's there are a lot more places for you to pitch your pilot, to pitch your movie. That comics is really hard to find an artist who's willing to do all this. When you do something, special that you can only do here. And it turns out, Robert Kirkman never thought Walking Dead would be a TV show. Cliff and I never imagined that Paper Girls would be a TV show. And it seems like if you want your thing to become a movie or a TV show, is to go out with that being the last thing you want. And then everyone's like, we can't wait for this. But it feels like when people sort of turn their unsold spec scripts into comics, and I'm like, now we're ready for the Hollywood machine to gobble it up. It's like people can smell. This wasn't meant to be a comic. This is just a glorified pitch for something else. So, push yourself to do things that comics allow you to do, not just in terms of special effects being cheaper, and that you can draw anything, but in terms of ideas. What ideas can you talk about that film and TV don't want to talk about? Like, mass shootings I mentioned, but sexuality, especially here in the States, is something that they are reluctant to talk about, but readers are craving that. Not all of them, but they want it. So make them come over to comics and be like, here's a story that you can't get anywhere else. I hope that's what we're trying to do.
I do think that's an underrated part of Saga's success, is that Saga is constantly delivering the new. I mean, if you look at this, like the arc you're in right now, I mean, most comics wouldn't introduce this many new characters so quickly. I mean, you have like Bombazine, the lovable but savage Bombazine. Oh God, this latest issue, what a gut punch! And then like the crew from the Skull and Crossbones ship, whose name escapes me, Mr. Jump said. I mean, the poor fadeaway user who's a widower, like all those different characters, and like you're constantly getting those. Also, there's the additional layer of the fact that they're constantly under threat because you're very famous for killing people. Poor Goose. Goose is like, people are horrified of Goose. They're just like, you got to save that guy.
It's dangerous. So the more people are like, please, I put them right to the top of the hit list.
Exactly.
Their lives are in danger. No, it is. It's death. It is, as I've talked about many a time. It is, again, that's something else that film and television is reluctant to do. You're never really going to kill off James Bond. There needs to be a James Bond. You can't really kill off Wolverine. There needs to be a Wolverine, and that's not what fiction was about. Stephen King always speaks eloquently about it. Fiction is about preparing us for the worst things that we will endure in life. And, Yeah, so there's something that's almost, we've been infantilized to have death be a strange, alien, crippling thing to encounter in fiction. Is like, this used to happen all the time. Characters die,
Yeah.
people die. So I'm, yes, grateful that that's something we're allowed to do. And I'm sorry for whatever might happen next, dear readers.
Well, you do a remarkable job, and I'm fairly confident in the fact that no matter what you do, people are going to love it, because at the very least, Fiona's drawing it. But,
Agreed.
Brian, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Saga, Spectators, Substack, your career, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Great questions. Thanks for letting me ramble, David. Let's do this again sometime.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Brian K. Vaughan. You can find his work in Saga and Spectators, the latter of which is over on the Exploding Giraffe Substack. A quick shout to Deanna Chapman, who edited this podcast and continues to completely rock at it. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Guido, Sequential Craft, Ben Damstead, Cameron Brown, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Warren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submet Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masellat, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Vaughan, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brendan DePills, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Carino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mazel, Paul Slade, Sakil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ranwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Brian Alcock, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Niccolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in the first Monday of July for the next episode.